welcome to the PIU Poetry Show, and this is our new season beginning with 2017. And we're starting 2017 with my very special guest, Angeline Schellenberg. Welcome, Angeline.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And I think you've been on the show before, haven't you? Yeah, I think you've been on the show once before, haven't you? Yeah, absolutely. Now, today we're gonna begin by talking about your bio. Angeline Schellenberg's poems have appeared in journals such as CV2, TNQ, Grain, and Lemonhound. The first chapbook, Roads of the Stone, published by the Alfred Gustav Press, launched in May. Oh, the music's still on. Okay, we're going to start that again. Sorry about that. That's probably why you were puzzled, I suppose. Okay, welcome to the PIU Poetry Show, and my special guest today is Angeline Schellenberg, and we're starting a new season, 2017. I think we've had Angeline on the show before, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we said that all at the beginning. Now I'm going to read her bio. Angeline Schellenberg's poems have appeared in journals such as CV2, TNQ, Grain, and Lemonhound. I have actually been published in Lemonhound myself. Her first chapbook, Roads of the Stone, published by the Alfred Gustav Press, launched in May 2015. Her poetry won third prize in Prairie Fire's 2014 Banff Centre Bliss Carman's Poetry Award contest and was shortlisted for Arc Poetry's magazine 2015 Poem of the Year. Angelina lives and reads in Germany with her husband, their two teenagers, and a German Shepherd Corgi. That's quite a combo. Shepherd Corgi. So, let's begin by talking about your upcoming reading tour.
Yeah, I'm going to BC with my friend and fellow Winnipeg writer, Joanne Epp. We leave on Friday. Our first event is on January 21st at a bookstore in Abbotsford called House of James, and we're performing together with a local musician, Kathy Hardy.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll be
that's in Victoria.
That's in Abbotsford.
Oh, Abbotsford. Okay.
Yeah. And then we have a couple events in Vancouver, one on the 24th at the Vancouver Public Library Fire Hall branch. And then I'm reading at the Twisted Poets reading series. And then in Victoria at the Planet Earth reading series.
Yeah, I think I've heard of Planet Earth. I haven't heard of the Twisted Poets series. Well, that's all very exciting.
Yeah, it's really fun.
So you're doing a 3-day whirlwind through the West Coast.
We'll be gone for 11 days, but we have 4 events, maybe 5 if we can get a house reading together on Salt Spring Island. Wow, very nice.
Yeah. And this was all through your publishing? How did this all come about?
My publisher, Brick Books, set up the 2 reading series, the Twisted Poets and Planet Earth. The others Joanne and I arranged
nice.
So we could read together. Yeah.
Nice, very nice. Well, the reason I'm curious is because I'm going to be on the West Coast myself in February.
Nice.
And they were set up by my publisher, one in Victoria and one in New Westminster. But anyway, the show's about you, not about me. So let's begin talking about your latest collection, which is actually being considered your debut collection. We had sort of a little talk about this online. Mm-hmm. Your debut collection is called Tell Them That It Was Mozart. It's published by Turnstone. Brickstone, not by Bricks. No, mm-hmm. Yeah, Brick Books Kitty would be really angry if I said that.
No, Kitty's eternally sweet.
Well, anyway, yeah, Brick Books, and now we talked a little bit about this online, and I think it's something worth considering with our listeners. Now, online you said that you felt that your chapbook and your recent collection, there's really not a lot of difference between the two. And I was kind of curious. Well, why would you say that? I mean, how are they in fact similar then?
Well, they were both started at about the same time. So the chapbook came out first, but some of the poems in the full-length collection were written first.
Right.
So how do you define debut? But they're both confessional. Very strong narrative poems. Mm-hmm. There's more variety in Tell Them It Was Mozart.
Yeah, and the reason I'm interested is that I began my poetry career by publishing first a chapbook and later a full collection, and then pretty much repeating. And I've seen this with other poets. For example, another poet who I know from Toronto called Nadia Matok. She published a chapbook called On Eric, and then it later became that almost the entire chapbook with some modification to the poems, part of her first collection called Sumptuary Laws. So where I'm going is, did you feel the same impulse, perhaps, to modify the poems so they would fit in with your debut collection, or did you think, just the heck with it, I'll just put them in there?
No, there's only 2 poems that are in both the chapbook and the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those particular poems stayed fairly similar.
Right.
They're both thematic, just slightly different themes. The chapbook was other people's stories of perseverance through difficult things like war, cancer.
Right.
And my full-length collection, Tell Them It Was Mozart, is all about my own journey of parenting 2 children on the autism spectrum from before they were born until a few years ago when they got to be around puberty. So. Right.
And they sort of are launching themselves a little bit with more independence into life.
Yeah, I'm a little more reticent to tell their story now because it's not so much my story, it's more their story. So.
Right.
And some people would argue with telling your children's story at all, but I have their permission. They love the book.
Right.
In fact,
yeah, and I think all of this conversation is really centered around a question that I wanted to ask, and you're already kind of answering it, and that is, how did you feel about this new book? How did you think and feel about it? I certainly have read other people's reactions, and I've read the blurbs, and of course I have my own reaction, but I'm wondering what your own thoughts are about this collection.
It feels very naked. It feels like people are reading my diary. I threw in a cat that doesn't exist just so I could say it wasn't all true, but pretty much it's all true. It's based very closely on my family's life, and but I feel like...
if I could interrupt you for a second there, this feeling of nakedness, I must tell you, is, in my case anyway, when I wrote my first book, which was a memoir / Italian travelogue, I was terrified of the thing. And so I can understand you're feeling naked. And one of the reasons I felt that I was terrified is that I kept thinking, maybe I shouldn't be telling these stories. Maybe this is something that I'm being too indiscreet. Is that kind of part of... When you talk about, let's flesh that out. What do you talk about feeling naked? What does that actually mean for you?
Well, having people
know you too well, or
maybe, and
feeling vulnerable,
feeling like they're judging me or misunderstanding me. But I felt very strongly it was a story that needed to be told, and I've gotten a lot of reactions from other parents. Saying that I put into words what they wished they could, and they want other people to hear what it's like. Right.
Well, I must tell you, I intend to pass on, now that I've finished it, on to my sister, because she also has a child on the autism spectrum, and
cool.
I'm looking forward to hearing her reaction to it, and I think it'll help her gain a perspective, I think. And I think that's certainly part of my, going back to reactions and thinking about what your book is, that's certainly part of my reactions. It gives a perspective that we actually rarely see in poetry, don't you think?
In what sense?
Well, first of all, in the sense that it's rare for poems to address children in a mother-child context. You do get father-son here and there, and I guess maybe I should back up and explain myself in that. I'm guessing, but I think I've probably read over 100 poetry books, and over the years, and it's rare to have this kind of complete collection. You do have individual poems about fathers and sons and mothers and daughters, yes, but you don't get entire collections like that. The only one that I can think of that has some, and it's very different, is Sylvia Plath's. A lot of her poems are about her relationship with her parents, but she's an adult.
Yeah.
All right, and this is very different. So I'm thinking, you're in my view, this is a very different and exceptional kind of. It stands out for that reason.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways that was a risk, because some publishers don't, and some readers don't like it when the poet is so visible in the poem. Like, there's not a lot of distance in my work between me and the poem.
Right.
Which I think it gives it that level of intimacy, but but it's not always done in poetry. It's not always appreciated in poetry.
Right,
So.
right. Well, I think the other thing too is that the voice stands out very strongly. Certainly your voice, and I think I mentioned this in my Facebook post. It's by turns wry, humorous, unflinching in what it looks at, and it tries. Part of it too is it's a book about origins, isn't it? In the sense that you're trying to understand where this all came from. Certainly at the beginning of the book, anyway.
Yeah, more so at the beginning. There's kind of a narrative arc, and the persona develops over the course of the book. But in the beginning, there's a lot of anxiety and a search for certainty and perfection and security. Right. And then by the end, there's more of an embracing of the uncertainty and the messiness of life, especially family life.
Yeah. Well, I think, if I can be philosophical, family life in general is messy.
Yes. It is for everybody.
It is for everybody.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like this morning I was listening to the news, and of course much of the news is about the American election. And,
right.
And one commentator said democracy is messy, and I said, well, true, but this is sort of an exception in its messiness. And not only that, most things are messy.
Yeah.
Which in this case I would include.
It's the human condition.
Yeah. It's we don't. Books, I think, give us the illusion that things are organized. Because
it's an attempt to make order out of
mess. That's right. That's right. Now let's go back to talking about your poetry, and one of the questions I was going to ask you is that why poetry? Why was it poetry that as an art form that made you want to write in? What was the attraction to poetry?
I love hearing poetry. I love reading poetry, and I like creating something beautiful out of the difficult moments in my life. And I like the way poetry can plunge you deep into an experience or an emotion, but then it lets you go quickly.
Mm-hmm. So
you can feel safe. Going to the depths of that emotion, because you know by the end of a page or two you'll have a release.
Right. That's really interesting. I've heard poets complain about the inferior quality of poetry. That it's like, in the sense that it's like a firefly, that it blinks and it's gone, and they find a lot of sadness in that.
Oh, I don't find it sad.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and the other part of that too, I've talked to another poet and she talks about what makes her sad about art in general is that it's a beauty that can't last.
It does, though, in a memory.
Okay. Yeah. Well, good for you. So when you were writing this collection, was there something you felt you wanted to include that didn't make it, or was there something there that you wanted to exclude? Was there something, and where I'm coming from is that often poets will, when you talk to them about their work, they'll go, I have a regret that I never wrote these things in that collection, or I have a regret that I took these things out of that collection. I should have left them in there. Did you have any kind of experience like that, or did you think about this recent collection like that?
The editing process was so intense. I think I wrote 20 new pieces. We took out 7. We completely rewrote others. We rearranged the whole thing, went through several different titles. And it was a difficult process. It was hard to let go of some of those pieces or some of my favorite lines. But then after it was all done and I went back and I looked at the pieces that we pulled out to see if I could do something with them, I realized, no, they're not worth saving. Like, we put in the right ones.
Right.
And I feel really good about what ended up in the collection.
Yeah. Did you find the editing, like, this is a substantial collection of poetry. I'm amazed at, this is a very thick collection of poetry. Yeah. Some people would have actually divided this into 2 books almost.
But it's all one theme. So
yeah, I know. I realize that. Yeah. But I think, did you find the editing process as long and trying as the actual writing itself, or were they different in terms of time and commitment?
Well, they overlapped a lot, because fairly early on when I was writing it, I was working with Mira Cook in the Sheldon Oberman Mentorship Program.
Oh, okay.
And then a year or two in, I worked with Don Mackay at the Sage Hill Writing Experience. And then the editing process with Brick was a year long, and I was still writing new stuff through that, so there wasn't really like writing, and now it's editing.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. I wonder if there's, okay, I've written it all, now let's edit it. No, so the writing and the editing were all going on simultaneously.
Yeah.
Well, I think, we're believe it or not, we're already at the halfway measure mark of this show, and you're listening to the opening show of the 2017 season of the PI New Poetry Show with your host, Carmelo Militano, my special guest, Angeline Schellenberg, and we're talking about her new collection, Tell Them It Was Mozart, published by Brick Books. You got that, Kitty? Brick Books? And I'm going to ask you if you can read from that collection.
Sure. Some of my favorite poems are the series where I've created characters based on my children.
Right.
One of the series is The Diminutive Professor.
Yeah, I actually... those were so cute. I
love them. So I'm going to read The Diminutive Professor Takes Summer Vacation.
Okay.
I need a welding kit, he tells me, his training wheels wobbling. What do you think of the axial catwalk, he asks, and holds plans up to my face, crews, quarters, and passenger decks neatly labeled squares on the back of his report card. And sheet metal. Lots of canvas. Can't brush his teeth without a stool, but this kid's got environmentally friendly air travel in the bag. He assures me the prototype scale model will fit between the barbecue and sandbox. And bracing wires. He'll need bracing wires. On the way home, a stop for ice cream cones. Library books on flight. The Hindenburg should have waited for helium, he says. They used the accessible hydrogen, but it's far more flammable. They shouldn't have been in such a hurry to take off.
Very nice. And actually, there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
Because the Hindenburg disaster pretty much kiboshed the development of those things. Which
it's a shame.
Yeah. And I have a friend of mine that believes that was a colossal mistake in air travel, that we should have been traveling with those things across the ocean.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, well, they're so spacious.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, moving right along. Now, when we think about you and poetry, were there certain poets that were important in developing your style or had an influence on your development as a poet?
Oh, absolutely. I feel so fortunate that the right mentors came into my life as I was starting out. I already mentioned I work with Mira Cook in the mentorship program.
A fine poet, and we've had her on the show as well.
Oh, she's fabulous and so encouraging. Yeah, she gave me a really good start. And working with Don Mackay. And I love his imagery. I just try to imitate him because I think he's brilliant. And I've taken workshops with Jennifer Still. She's so warm, and I think she was the first person that called me a real poet. I was just barely starting. And Joanne Epp, who I'm touring with, we've been in a writing group together for 5 or 6 years, meeting every month, workshopping poems. So she read pretty much every poem in this book before it went to print.
Now, let's just go off on a little sidebar here. How important is it for you to workshop poems before you actually submit them? Is that a very important process for you?
It is, yeah.
Okay, and what's the benefit in your view?
Sometimes I leave things in my head instead of putting them on the page.
Oh, okay.
And when someone else reads it and I see how they're understanding it, then I can find the holes. And even in things like the music of the poem, if I have too many S's in a row that are very difficult to speak out loud, or an image that just isn't working, it's nice to...
Yeah. I haven't workshopped per se, but I do have readers now and again that read stuff, and they're really good at catching the fact that I overuse the word the.
Oh, and I've gotten in trouble for taking out too many thes.
Yeah, I've got too many thes. Interesting. Now, that kind of connects with my other question I was going to ask of you, and that is, how long does it typically take for you to write a poem? Do you actually have some sense of or I mean, at least in this collection, where part of where I'm coming from is that the old question: how do you know when a poem's done? How do you know when it's finished? So there's a process that you go through. So I wonder if you could talk about that.
It's so different for different poems.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of it.
Usually I start by scribbling notes and then typing them up and playing with them on the computer. And it might not take that long to write the first draft, but yeah, it's the editing that takes the weeks, months, or years.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of reminds me of the method I've read about Elizabeth Bishop, the American poet, and that she would write a poem out in longhand, and she had a corkboard, and then she would put it there, and she said sometimes it would be on the corkboard for years before she went back and looked. And I thought, wow. So that leads to me wondering how poets do it. I mean, some poets are very quick, some are slow. I guess it varies on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I've heard a lot of poets say that they feel like they're never done. I'm kind of the opposite. I get a certain music in my head and I write it down and I really like it, and I sometimes friends and editors have to pry my fingers off it and say, you know what, you really should consider changing this.
Yeah.
That can be hard.
Okay. Now, when we're thinking about your collection, one of the notes I wrote down about of my reaction to this is that this is a very maternal collection of poetry. It's about childbirth. It's about post-childbirth, and there's a real wonder, and in this book, as much as there is exhaustion, which again I think is part of the reason I think this book stands out, is that you don't have collections of poetry that sort of try and, in a sense, document's not the right word, but at least talk about the process of being a mom, and certainly a mom to two kids on the autism spectrum. Now, does that make sense to you, what I just told you, or am I completely out to lunch there?
No, I like the word wonder. That's a great word for poetry. And when I was working with Mira, one of the words that she told me to keep, or one of the concepts she told me to keep in mind when I was writing, like the tone of the whole thing, was affectionate exasperation. Affectionate exasperation.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. So when we're thinking about the wonder and exhaustion of your poems, but behind your poems, is there your own individual faith? Does that come into your poetry, or is that something separate? I had a sense that it's kind of there a little bit.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that the first comments from my editor when we started working together were that she said, your faith is kind of like a ghost in this first draft. Can you bring it out more? And I wasn't expecting that. And so I did add in more poems that mention faith. God doesn't come up much, but there's a lot of prayer. Which is something that I held on to. And sometimes it's not even prayer with words. Like the last poem is about how every breath and just the act of getting out of bed again in the morning can be an act of faith.
Well, that's true in terms of your. Okay. I was thinking also the very last thing that I read was that you reprinted a poem where the poet ends up in Holland rather than Italy.
Oh, yes.
Which turns out to be a metaphor for, obviously for, you expected this kind of child, but you got this child instead. And that's actually a very delightful poem, but it's not your poem.
Well, that's in the notes section at the back of the book, and that's one thing I wish I'd made clear, that's part of the notes. It's not part of the book itself. And it's there to provide context for the erasure poems that introduce each section throughout the book, where I've pulled words out of her essay, Welcome to Holland, and made them into my own poems.
You're calling it an essay, but I thought it was a poem, kind of, wasn't it?
I've heard it called both.
Yeah. Well, it's structured kind of like a prose poem, right? But I guess you could call it a poem or some kind. But I of course, being Italian, I was delighted to know that your real destination was Italy. I thought, well, hooray! I didn't know Italy resonated so much for people. But I mean, I liked it as a metaphor.
And you saw some faith aspect to that?
No, the faith was something separate.
Oh, okay.
I just I just thought of when you're talking about the end of the book, my mind immediately went right to that last poem. But the faith thing, I think your editor had it correct. It is a ghost there. It seemed to me there was it was always sort of implied rather than stated directly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the undercurrent of hope. Like,
yes.
I wanted this book to resonate with hope and joy, not the frustration and despair to take over. And I think for me personally, God is like the carpet that no one can pull out from under me when everything else falls apart. And so that's where the hope comes from.
All right, well, we're going to get you to read one more poem, and then, alas, we're going to have to close the show, and we never ended up playing your song because we got so engaged in our conversation. We're already at 4:56 rather.
Okay.
One more poem.
Sure.
And this is from, just so folks know what you're doing here, this is Angeline Schellenberg reading, Tell Them That It Was Mozart.
To make a more imperfect person. Teach me to yell like a Wookiee, yodel like hell. Gone are the days of overthinking the Cat in the Hat's motivation. No more wearing white. Wild child, give your mother words for all that's alien. Hyperdrives, holodecks, and naps. Make me forget the names of acid-wash bullies and the reason I ever leave the room. Teach me that 4 p.m. is made for Fruit Loops and disco. Burp the Greek alphabet to the tune of Zest commercials. Let's reclaim Narnia for the naiads while the rigatoni burns. Who says it's rude to praise shoppers for their resemblance to Stegosauri? Oh, baby, make me toss the experts. Make me believe in mutants and mermaids again. When I see dust, show me sparkle. Grant me earworms and wormholes, earthworms and whims. Write me a thesaurus in which the synonym for soothe is keep your distance, and the opposite of late is just stay home. Smear my smug chin with peanut butter. Teach me to hide Mother's Little Helpers, Dr. Pepper and Three Musketeers, in the folded arms of sweaters. Make me choose between losing you at Value Village and starring as your abductor on Canada AM. See me hang loose like my empty junk drawer, ready for anything.
Hooray! And that was Angelina Schellenberg reading from her debut collection, Tell Them It Was Mozart, and our opening poet for the PINU Poetry Show season of 2017. That was terrific. Actually, you picked my favorite poem.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, so that's actually my favorite in the whole collection.
Oh, nice.
Next week, we're going to fast forward. We have Tim Walker. This is kind of a quirky thing. We have Tim Walker, who interviewed me on his show called Drunken Spoons, and we thought here at the station it would be fun to play that interview on my show. So I thought, okay, let's do that. And so next week, but I'm actually not talking about poetry. I'm talking about my novel, Sebastiano's Vine. Nevertheless, thank you for listening. Tune in next week for something a little quirky. And again, this was the PIU Poetry Show with your host, Carmelo Militano. See you next week.